Get your filthy hands off my father, you goddamn whore! The words exploded into the cavernous drawing room like a volley of shotgun pellets through a cathedral window. Damien Knight's voice, a thing of steel and thunder honed in boardrooms and back alleys of corporate warfare, cracked the fragile afternoon silence. The heavy oak doors slammed against the wall behind him, and the universe seemed to hold its breath. In that frozen sliver of time, Elara Vance flinched, her heart catapulting into her throat with such force she could taste the bitter tang of adrenaline. Her arms instinctively tightened around the frail, trembling body of Arthur Bellamy. His thin silk pajama shirt was plastered to his back, soaked in a sweat born not of impropriety, but of the monumental effort of a short, assisted walk. She had just guided him from his favorite armchair to the window, a 10-foot journey that was, for him, a trek across a continent. His knees had buckled without warning, a sudden surrender of muscle and nerve. And she had caught him. His face was mere inches from her chest, his sparse white hair brushing her chin, their bodies pressed together out of sheer desperate necessity, not by choice. But to Damien Knight, who had stormed into his ancestral home unannounced, it was a tableau of pure, predatory filth. "You disgusting little snake," Damien spat, his polished Italian shoes devouring the distance across the Persian rug. "Is this what you do when I'm gone? Hurl yourself at a helpless old man? My God, have you no shame?" "No, Mr. Knight, wait," Elara gasped, stumbling backward as she tried to lower Arthur gently into his wheelchair. Her arms were raised in a useless gesture of defense. "Please, it's not what it looks like. He asked me to help him walk. They cut his physical therapy sessions." She settled Arthur into the chair, keeping a steadying hand on his bony shoulder. "I was just what?" Damien snapped, his face a mask of cold fury. "Helping him into bed? Keeping him warm with a hug? Jesus Christ, don't you dare lie to my face!" he roared, his voice bouncing off the high, frescoed ceilings. "I walk in here and find the goddamn housemaid grinding on my father like a vulture circling its next meal. You think because he's weak, he's an easy mark? A meal ticket for a backwoods tramp like you?" Arthur, still gasping for breath from his exertion and the shock, sat trembling in his wheelchair. "Damien, stop. She wasn't—" But Damien wasn't listening. His world had narrowed to the woman before him, the embodiment of every betrayal he'd ever faced. "You gold-digging leech," he hissed, the words laced with venom. "I should have known better than to let your kind into this house. All that doe-eyed innocence, pretending to care, creeping around this estate like you belong here." He lunged forward and shoved her. Hard, Elara lost her footing, her balance obliterated. She fell sideways, her arm catching the sharp corner of a mahogany side table. A sickening crack of pain shot through her elbow, and a thin crimson line bloomed instantly across her forearm, the blood beading up like tiny rubies against her pale skin. Gasps erupted around them. The butler, Jennings, who had been a silent statue in the doorway, took a sharp breath. So did Marcia, the cook, her round face a canvas of horror. 2 junior house staff, hovering in the hallway, looked on with wide, terrified eyes. "My God," someone whispered. And then the murmurs began, a low, insidious plague of whispers. A housemaid leaned toward another staff member. "She's been alone with Mr. Bellamy for hours every single day. God only knows what else she's done." Another added, "Shameless girl, throwing herself at him like that. I always knew there was something off about her." A wave of heat, fierce and suffocating, rushed to Elara's cheeks. It wasn't the heat of shame. It was the white-hot inferno of fury. Not a single soul in that room knew what had transpired just 3 hours earlier. Arthur, staring at his own legs with a look of profound frustration, had looked up at her, his voice a quiet thread of resolve. Let's try again today, Alara. Just a few steps for me. For my soul. And she had helped him. Patiently. Gently. She had walked beside him, her arm a firm but unobtrusive support. She had wiped the sweat from his brow when he pushed himself too hard, whispering words of encouragement. When his legs had finally given out, she had caught him. That was the moment Damien Knight had walked in on. That was the crime. Alara pushed herself up slowly, her body shaking, trying to steady her ragged breath. They cut the therapy schedule, she stammered, the words tumbling out, desperate to find purchase in the hostile air. The insurance agency dropped his in-home therapist 3 weeks ago. He begged me to help. I was just following the routine Dr. Lauren gave him. He didn't let her finish. He stepped forward, grabbed a fistful of her dark, silky hair, and yanked her brutally to her knees. A cry of pain, of fear, of utter disbelief was torn from her throat. "You're done here," he growled, his face inches from hers, his breath hot with rage. "Get your things. Get out. And if I ever see you near my father or this property again, I will have you arrested for trespassing and assault." "No, please, please," Alara sobbed, her hands gripping his wrist, her own blood smearing on his pristine white cuff. "Don't do this. I didn't mean any harm. I have no one else. My mother, she's sick. I need this job. I'll do anything. Just please don't take this from me." If your heart is breaking for Alara right now, do me a favor and smash that like button, and comment below where you're watching from. You might just find a neighbor who feels the same way. "Enough!" The roar came from the wheelchair. It was stronger, clearer, more resonant than any sound Arthur Bellamy had made in weeks. He was struggling against his own infirmity, pushing himself upright. "Let her go, Damien. That is enough." Damien turned, panting, sweat beading on his temple. "You don't know what she was doing, Dad. I know exactly what she was doing," Arthur interrupted, his voice ragged but unwavering. "She was helping me when no one else would, because your precious staff and their goddamn budget cuts left me to rot in this chair." Damien stared at his father, utterly stunned. "She caught me before I hit the ground today," Arthur continued, his voice gaining strength with every word. "She's the reason I can feel my damn legs again. You want the truth? That woman," he gestured with a trembling hand toward Alara, "has shown more compassion in her fingertips than you've shown me in years." Damien hesitated. The room fell into a dead, ringing silence. His hand, still tangled in Alara's hair, loosened. He turned and stared at his father, really stared, and what he saw shocked him to his core. It wasn't just anger. It was disappointment. Profound, soul-deep disappointment. Arthur's face was pale, but not with fatigue, with shame. For his son. His mouth trembled, but his eyes held steady, clear and damning. "I didn't raise you to be this," the old man said, his voice dropping to a heartbroken whisper. "Not this." Damien stood frozen, the accusation hanging in the air like poison gas. Alara scrambled to her feet, humiliated, her pride shattered, her dignity shredded into 1,000 pieces. Her hands were still trembling as she wiped the blood from her chin. And then she ran. Out of the room, through the grand hall, and out of the house. The murmurs didn't follow her, only the heavy, suffocating silence of guilt. Damien Knight stood by the towering bay window of his father's study, arms crossed so tightly his knuckles were white, jaw locked, eyes refusing to blink. Outside, the afternoon rain had softened to a fine, gray mist that clung to the ancient oaks on the lawn, but inside him the storm had just begun to rage. Behind him, the room was a tomb of silence. The house manager, Alan, lingered in the doorway, his posture a study in uncertainty. Finally, with a hesitant breath, he asked, "Sir, Would you like me to personally escort Miss Vance from the premises? Damien didn't turn. No, he said, the word clipped and sharp. She'll leave when she's ready. I'm not running a prison here. Alan hesitated again. Then, should I notify the agency? Her contract? She broke more than her contract, Damien snapped, cutting him off. The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. She broke trust. She took advantage of a vulnerable old man in his own home. With a stiff nod, Alan retreated, closing the door quietly behind him. Damien let out a long, shuddering breath, finally turning toward the massive family portrait hanging above the marble fireplace. Arthur stood tall and proud in the painting, decades younger, his late wife radiant beside him, and a boy of 12, Damien himself, staring up with unadulterated pride in his eyes. Now that boy was a man grown hard and cynical by years of brutal competition, bitter betrayal, and the cold, hard logic of the bottom line. And yet, he couldn't shake the image of Ilara's hand steadying his father. They hadn't been seductive. They hadn't been calculating. They had been focused, controlled, human. He rubbed his temples, a headache beginning to throb behind his eyes. No, he couldn't doubt himself. He saw what he saw. A man of his position couldn't afford to be wrong. Downstairs, in a small but comfortable room in the guest wing, Ilara moved with slow, deliberate steps. Her suitcase, an old, scuffed black one that had seen her through 3 cities and a lifetime of hope and disappointment, sat half-packed on the edge of her bed. Her resignation letter was already written, folded neatly in the front pocket of her worn tote bag. She picked up a framed photo from the bedside table. It was her mother, back in their small Georgia town, standing in front of the little house they had nearly lost twice. Ilara had sent half her paycheck home every single month, without fail. Working for the Bellamys wasn't a privilege. It was a lifeline. Until now. A knock sounded on her door. Not hard, not soft. Familiar. She opened it. Arthur sat there in his wheelchair, his head tilted slightly, his tired eyes searching her face. He looked utterly exhausted, his body more slumped than usual, his left hand trembling faintly in his lap. I asked Alan to bring me down, he said, his voice weak but firm. Had to see you. You shouldn't be out of bed, she replied softly, her own voice thick with unshed tears. He gave her a lopsided, weary smile. Can't trust a billionaire's temper tantrum to tell the whole story, can we? She stepped aside and let him roll into the room. It smelled faintly of lavender and clean linen, and the only light came from the small lamp beside the bed. Arthur wheeled closer and reached into the inner pocket of his cashmere sweater. He pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It's from Dr. Kincaid, the updated rehab schedule. You followed it better than the last 3 specialists combined. Ilara didn't take it. He sighed. He's wrong, you know. My son. I don't want to talk about him. He's not a bad man. He treated me like I was, she said, her voice tight with a pain that went deeper than the scrape on her arm. Like I was trash. Like I was disposable. Arthur looked down at his trembling hands. He's afraid. Ilara raised a skeptical eyebrow. Of me? No, he said, looking up. Of himself. Of what he saw, and how it made him feel. There was a long, heavy pause. I thought, Arthur continued slowly, that raising a son meant giving him all the tools I never had. A good education, money, a legacy, but I forgot to give him something else. What? Discernment. Ilara finally took the paper from his lap, folding it once more and placing it on the dresser. You should be here, she said gently. You need to rest. He looked up at her, his eyes damp with something deeper than exhaustion. So do you. Back upstairs, Damien stood at the top of the grand staircase, watching the shadows flicker in the foyer below. Something was pulling at him, a gnawing, unfamiliar sensation. Guilt. Regret. No, he told himself, it was clarity. He was doing the right thing. His father needed structure, not sentiment, discipline, not dependence. Still, he made his way down the stairs, his steps slow and heavy. As he reached the guest hallway, he caught a glimpse of light from beneath Ilara's door. He heard his father's voice, murmuring low and warm. Then Ilara's voice, calm and steady, like a melody he couldn't quite place. He stopped. He knew he shouldn't listen, but he did. "Why didn't you defend me?" It was Ilara's voice, raw and quiet. "I tried," Arthur replied. "No, you defended your decision to keep me. You didn't defend me." Damien's stomach twisted into a knot. I didn't have the words," Arthur said, his voice thick with shame. "I failed you. I failed him, too." "I'm not asking you to choose between us," Ilara said, "but I will not stay where I am not respected." There was silence. Then Arthur, almost a whisper, "Will you give him time?" Ilara's answer came slowly, weighted with a sorrowful finality. "Time doesn't cure rot, Mr. Bellamy. It only hides the smell." Damien turned and walked away, quietly, silently. Each step felt like a stone being laid on his back. In the days that followed, Ilara stayed in her room. She packed slowly, sorting through memories that didn't belong to her, and yet had shaped her time in this house. She avoided eye contact with the staff. She refused to acknowledge the hush of whispers that followed her through the hallways. She didn't explain. She didn't plead. She was done explaining. The truth didn't beg to be believed. She was sitting on the edge of the bed late one evening, her suitcase finally zipped, when she saw a white envelope on the dresser. She hadn't put it there. Inside, a note written in precise, elegant cursive. "You changed my life more in 8 months than my own son has in 40 years. If this house loses you, it loses its soul." Arthur Bellamy. She folded it, pressing it to her chest. No tears came. She was beyond tears now. She had her dignity. She had the truth. And as she looked one more time at the room she was leaving behind, a sliver of something unfamiliar crept in. Not anger, not fear, hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone else had started to see. The morning after Ilara received Arthur's note, the Bellamy estate felt different. Not quieter, no. The silence had always lived here, a permanent resident in the vast, empty spaces between people. But today, the silence was heavier, thicker, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Ilara stood in the cavernous kitchen, her suitcase parked by the back door, her coat folded neatly over it. Her uniform was pressed, her dark hair tied back as always. She wouldn't leave in a storm of emotion. She would leave with grace. The same way she had entered. Rosalind, the head cook, and one of the few staff members who never whispered behind Ilara's back, walked in holding a steaming mug. She set it down on the butcher block in front of her. "Chamomile." "For the nerves," she said, her voice a low, comforting rumble. "I'm all right," Ilara replied softly. "You don't have to be," Rosalind said, giving her a look that communicated a lifetime of seeing this kind of drama before. "But you do have to walk out of here with your head held high." Ilara offered a small, grateful smile. "That's the only way I know how." They shared a quiet moment, a silent communion of solidarity. Then a voice echoed from the hallway, calm, direct, painfully familiar. "Miss Vance, a word, please." Ilara turned. Damien Knight stood there, dressed in a tailored suit of charcoal gray, his shoes gleaming under the recessed lighting. But his usual air of unshakable authority was clouded by something else today. Uncertainty. Maybe even discomfort. Rosalind glanced between them, a silent question in her eyes, then slipped away to tend to something on the stove. Damien stepped into the kitchen, his hands tucked into his trouser pockets. For a man so accustomed to commanding every room he entered, he looked like he wasn't sure where to begin. "I owe you an apology," he said at last, the words sounding foreign on his tongue. Ilara said nothing. She simply waited. He cleared his throat, a flicker of frustration crossing his features before it was suppressed. "What I said, what I assumed, it was wrong." She let the silence stretch, just a little longer than what was polite. "You didn't just assume, Mr. Knight. You judged. You humiliated me." "I know." "Do you?" He looked away, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "No excuse I could possibly give you would be enough. I let fear do the talking." Ilara's brow furrowed slightly. "Fear of what?" He hesitated, the admission clearly costing him. "Of losing control. Of seeing my father depend on someone else, someone I didn't know, someone I didn't trust." "You didn't try to," she said, the statement simple, unadorned, and utterly true. He nodded, meeting her gaze again. "That's on me." Ilara reached for her suitcase handle. "I appreciate the apology, Mr. Knight, but I'm still leaving." "I figured," he said quietly. "But before you do, there's something you should see." She studied his face. It wasn't smug or manipulative this time. Just tired. Sincere. He motioned toward the hallway. "Please." Against her better judgment, a small flicker of curiosity compelled her to follow him through the silent estate. He led her not upstairs or into the main drawing room, but down a long corridor toward the old east wing. It had once been a nursery, then his mother's painting studio. Now it served as storage, or so she had thought. Damien opened a heavy door she had never seen unlocked. Inside was not a room of dusty furniture, but a state-of-the-art command center. Walls were lined with monitors, shelves stacked with binders of medical files, financial documents, and staff reports. This was where Damien Knight managed his father's world when he wasn't physically present. Surveillance logs, medical charts, everything. "I review it all," Damien said, his voice low. "But I hadn't looked through the last 3 months of footage. Not closely." He walked over to a large monitor, tapped a few keys, and pulled up a video file from the living room, dated 3 days ago. It showed Ilara gently encouraging Arthur as he took his first unaided steps in weeks. She stood behind him, hands hovering, ready, but never clutching. She didn't rush him. She didn't praise herself. She just offered soft, steady words of support. Then, footage from the kitchen. Arthur was laughing, a rare and raspy sound. Ilara was showing him how to make scrambled eggs with one hand, the way she guided him, not like a servant, not even like a nurse, but like a friend. Then, the footage from the very moment Damien had walked in, and exploded. The angle from the corner camera showed it clearly. Arthur had begun to collapse, his legs giving out completely. Ilara caught him, her arms wrapping around him purely for support, her body a shield against the hard floor. The intimacy Damien thought he saw, the predatory closeness, wasn't there at all. It was a moment of pure, uncalculated care. He let the video play out, including his own brutal entrance and cruel words. Ilara watched silently, not because she needed proof of her own actions, but because she finally understood that he needed it. When the screen went dark, Damien turned to her, his face etched with a shame so profound it seemed to age him. "I jumped to conclusions. I didn't look. I didn't think. And worst of all, I didn't ask you." Ilara's expression didn't soften, but her voice did. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because I saw the letter my father wrote you," Her eyes flickered. "I may not understand the way you do things," Damien continued, "but I understand loyalty when I see it. He trusts you. And he's different with you." Elara crossed her arms. "He's vulnerable with me. That doesn't mean I'm manipulating him." "I know. I believe that now, and I want to make it right." She raised an eyebrow. "With a video and a late apology?" "No," he said. "With honesty and maybe a request." "A request?" "I want you to stay." Elara looked at him, stunned into silence. "After what you said?" He nodded. "Because of what I said. I was raised to believe that weakness needed to be hidden. That vulnerability was dangerous. You've taught him, maybe you've taught both of us, that healing starts with honesty, with care, with being human." She studied him. The man in front of her was still the Damien Knight of Wall Street headlines, the ruthless tactician. But there was something peeling away beneath the armor, a crack of humility, a trace of truth. "And if I stay?" she asked cautiously. "You don't answer to me," he said, the words clear and deliberate. "You answer to no one. You stay as my father's companion, his aide, his friend, and I stay the hell out of your way." Elara was quiet for a long, heavy beat. Then she said, "One condition." "Name it." "You say it publicly. You clear my name to every single person in this house. I will not walk these halls like a ghost they whisper about." Damien nodded without hesitation. "You'll have it." Elara stepped back. The room felt too small suddenly, the emotions too large. "You've got a lot of work to do," she said. "So do you," he replied. And just like that, something shifted. Not a grand revelation, not instant forgiveness, but the first fragile stone being laid in the painstaking rebuilding of something broken. Outside, the sun began to push through the morning clouds. Inside, a man who once judged too quickly was beginning to learn that justice doesn't come from assumption. It comes from truth, no matter how long it takes to finally see it. The Bellamy dining hall hadn't seen this much tension since the day the family lawyer read Arthur's late wife's will. The long mahogany table, usually a silent, dignified island in the center of the room, was now the site of whispered debates and sideways glances from the assembled household staff. Damien stood at the head, arms held firmly at his sides, his voice level but carrying a weight that silenced every murmur. "Before anyone here speaks another word behind a closed door, I'll say this plainly. Elara Vance is not leaving this house. She never should have been asked to." Around him, the room froze. Staff members looked at one another nervously. A few lowered their eyes in shame. Others looked utterly stunned. At the far end of the room, Rosalind cracked the ghost of a smile. Elara stood to the side, near the large French doors, her spine straight not out of pride, but out of necessity. Even now, with this public declaration, her skin still bore the phantom weight of their suspicion, of lies whispered with such confidence they had almost become truth. But now, finally, she wasn't the only one speaking her truth aloud. "Every assumption I made," Damien continued, his gaze sweeping across the room, "was based on a lie I told myself. That my father was too weak to know who to trust, that I was the only one who could protect him. I was wrong. He trusted her, and I failed them both." He paused, allowing the gravity of his admission to settle in the silent room. "Let me be absolutely clear. Elara Vance has acted with nothing but integrity, patience, and profound care. If anyone here has a problem with that, it is your problem, not hers." Rosalind stepped forward first, setting down the silver tray she had been holding. "Then I think we all owe her more than just silence, Mr. Knight." A soft wave of nods followed. Not everyone, but enough. It was a start. Elara's chest rose slowly with a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her eyes met Damien's for just a second, and he gave a brief, barely perceptible nod. It was a gesture that said, "This was only the beginning." Later that afternoon, Ilara returned to the sunroom, her favorite place in the house. Arthur sat there, a book resting unread in his lap, a cashmere blanket over his legs, the warm afternoon sun bathing his face. She hadn't spoken to him since the meeting. Not really. They had shared space, but not words. "Quite the press conference," he said without opening his eyes. Ilara chuckled, easing into the wicker chair beside him. "He rehearsed. He's his mother's son, after all. She always knew how to command a room." He turned his head slightly toward her. "Why did you agree to stay?" "Because I'm still alive, Ilara," Arthur said simply. "And people who are alive don't need pity. We need purpose. You could have found someone else." "I didn't want someone else." His voice was quiet but firm. "I wanted you. You didn't treat me like a project. You treated me like a man learning to walk again." Ilara looked away, out at the sprawling rose garden. Not everyone saw it that way. "They will," he said with unshakable certainty. "Eventually, they always do. Truth has a way of surviving much longer than lies." Silence hung between them, but it wasn't heavy this time. It was a shared, comfortable quiet, the kind that exists between two people who have fought their way through the same storm and found shelter on the other side. As days turned into weeks, the house began to recalibrate. Damien stayed longer each afternoon, sometimes joining them for tea, sometimes just watching from a distance. He never interrupted. He didn't over-explain himself. He simply showed up. One afternoon, as Ilara was helping Arthur adjust his position on the patio, Damien approached with a small, beautifully carved wooden box in his hand. "I found this in storage," he said, setting it gently on the table between them. "Thought it might belong in the sunlight." Ilara opened it slowly. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, from Arthur's younger years. Black and white prints of a stronger man, a man full of boundless energy, posing beside fast cars, smiling at his late wife, holding a tiny, serious toddler who would grow into Damien himself. Arthur blinked hard, his eyes suddenly moist. "I thought these were lost." "You kept saying that," Damien said, a rare softness in his voice. "But they were right where you left them. You just forgot where to look." Ilara picked one up. It was Arthur, his hair wind-blown, holding a fishing rod, his laughter frozen in time. She handed it to him gently. "Maybe we should frame a few of these," she said. Arthur nodded slowly. "I'd like that." Later that night, as Ilara walked through the quiet halls toward her room, she heard faint voices coming from the old office. "She's changed him," Alan, the house manager, whispered. "She's still just staff," came another voice, sharp and bitter. "He's only keeping her around because he feels guilty." Ilara didn't slow down. She didn't knock on the door to confront them. She didn't need to. She had heard worse. But as she reached the bottom of the grand staircase, she caught sight of Damien at the top landing. He had heard them, too. For a long moment, they just stared at each other across the vast, shadowed space. He didn't speak. Neither did she. But in his eyes, she saw something stronger than guilt. She saw resolve. The next morning, Ilara entered the kitchen to find a letter waiting for her on the counter, thick, cream-colored paper, embossed with the Bellamy family crest. She unfolded it carefully. "Miss Vance, as of today, your title is no longer staff. You are now appointed as Director of Personal Rehabilitation and Senior Care for Mr. Arthur Bellamy. This role comes with full executive status within the household management structure. Your salary will reflect this position, but more importantly, your authority will match it. Sincerely, Damien Knight." She read it twice, then a third time. When she looked up, Rosalind was smiling at her from the stove. "He's learning," the cook said. Ilara nodded, still holding the letter. "We all are." That evening, she walked Arthur through his paces, slow, deliberate steps across the stone walkway in the garden. The sun dipped low behind the trees, casting everything in a soft, amber light. His hand gripped hers, his breath steady. "Feels like I'm reclaiming parts of myself I thought were gone forever," he said. "You are." They stopped at a bench near the roses. He sat, and she joined him. "You know," he said quietly, "my son was raised in a world where power was the only language that mattered. You taught him another one." "What's that?" "Humility." Ilara smiled. "It's not an easy language to learn." "No," he agreed, "but it's the only way to truly grow." In the silence that followed, the sounds of the estate softened. There were no whispers, no judgment, just the gentle rustle of wind through the leaves and the slow, steady rebuilding of something far more powerful than status or wealth. Trust. And though Ilara knew more storms might come, she also knew something else with a certainty that settled deep in her bones. This time she wouldn't have to face them alone. Look at that support. If you believe in the power of community, make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you don't miss how this story ends. We're in this together. The sun was still a pale blush on the eastern horizon when Ilara stepped into the old greenhouse behind the Bellamy estate, a place Arthur used to frequent daily before his stroke. It was overgrown now, neglected, but sunlight poured through the grimy glass ceiling, giving a stubborn, defiant life to vines that climbed recklessly across the wooden beams. A thin layer of dust coated everything, but the air smelled alive. Green, earthy, and full of sleeping memories. Ilara knelt by the old workbench, brushing away a few dead leaves. She found an old journal Arthur had kept there, still wrapped in a plastic bag to protect it from the moisture. It felt strange to hold something so personal, yet comforting. In this house, where history had so often been buried or polished away, something unfiltered was a rare treasure. She opened it slowly. Inside were scrolled notes in Arthur's firm, uneven handwriting. Lists of seedlings he wanted to plant, ideas for a community garden he'd dreamed of starting on the unused eastern plot. Notes about staff birthdays, even a passage about Damien as a boy, curious and restless, once caught sneaking sun-warmed tomatoes straight from the vines. She smiled. Behind her, footsteps crunched on the gravel path. Damien. "I didn't know anyone still came out here," he said, his voice softer in the enclosed space. Ilara didn't look up from the journal. "Not many do. But I thought maybe this place deserved a little light again." Damien stepped beside her, his hands in his pockets. "He used to spend hours in here. Said it was the only place he felt truly grounded." "Funny," she said, "for a man who built empires with glass and steel." "That was the problem," Damien muttered, more to himself than to her. "He spent his life building things that were too tall to touch the ground. He forgot how to get his hands dirty." He watched her gently flip another page. "He still wants to build that community garden," Damien added. "He talks about it when he's tired. Says you'd help him." "I would," Ilara said softly, "but not if it's just for show." Damien tilted his head. "You think everything I do is for show?" "I think," she replied evenly, finally looking at him, "that you're learning how to tell the difference." He didn't argue. Back at the main house, Arthur sat in the sunroom, a soft blanket across his knees, his eyes closed. He was listening to the wind tickle the windows. Some mornings he woke with a fire in him, a desperate need to reclaim his old strength. Others, like today, he was quieter, slower, content to exist within the moment. Rosalind brought him his morning tea, and he sipped it slowly. "She's in the greenhouse again?" he asked without opening his eyes. "She is," Rosalind confirmed. With your son. Arthur chuckled softly. Maybe she'll teach him how to grow something other than his ego. Rosalind laughed. Then her expression turned more serious. You should tell her, Arthur, what you told me. He looked at her, his brief humor fading. Not yet. She deserves to know. I know, Arthur murmured, but I'm not ready to admit I made the biggest mistake of my life. Not out loud. Rosalind nodded, her face full of a deep, quiet understanding. Then do it before someone else does. That afternoon, Ilara returned to the house to find a letter slid beneath her door. The envelope bore no name, just her initials, EV, neatly printed in gold ink. Inside was a single sheet. Miss Vance, your appointment as director stands, but I would ask that you meet me in my office at 4 p.m. today. This is not a reprimand. This is a conversation I should have had with you long ago. Damien Knight. At 4 p.m. sharp, she knocked once and entered. Damien sat behind the wide oak desk, the same one his father had used for decades, but the way he sat in it now, more grounded, less guarded, made him seem like a different man. He gestured to the leather chair across from him. Please. Ilara sat, crossing her legs neatly. What is it you want to talk about? He took a deep breath. I've been reviewing the estate's finances. That's not part of my department. It is now, he said, because a part of my father's legacy is about to get a second life, and I want you involved. She raised an eyebrow. Go on. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. I'm opening the community garden. Not for PR, not for headlines, for real people. And I want you to manage it. Ilara blinked, genuinely surprised. I want it to be more than just vegetables, he continued, his voice gaining passion. A place for the elderly, for veterans, for kids who've never had a backyard. A place where people learn how to grow something together. Ilara sat back slowly. That's a lot of trust for someone you nearly fired. It's exactly because I nearly fired you, Damien said, his gaze unwavering. You showed more character in the worst moment of your life than most people show in a lifetime. She considered him. This garden, it would need support, tools, funding, outreach. You'll have it, he said, as if reading her mind. Full control. Hire who you want, fire who you don't. Ilara thought for a long moment, then nodded once. All right. He blinked. Just like that? I told you once, I don't need apologies. I need actions. This is a start. He smiled faintly, a genuine, unforced smile. Then we begin. That evening, Arthur sat beside the fireplace. He had asked to be wheeled there, insisting on feeling the warmth of a real flame instead of the filtered sunlight through the window. Ilara joined him. I hear you've been recruited into gardening again, he said, a twinkle in his eye. She smiled. I hear you planted the first seed a long time ago. They sat in comfortable silence. Then he said, There's something I've been avoiding telling you. She looked at him, waiting. When you first came here, he began, his voice slower now, more deliberate. I didn't hire you just for your resume. I hired you because you reminded me of someone. Who? My sister. She died when I was just a teenager. She was strong, clear-eyed. She never flinched when the world was being cruel. You carry that same fire. Ilara swallowed. I didn't know. You weren't supposed to. But I think maybe that's why I trusted you so fast, and why it hurt so much to see Damien tear you down. She reached over and laid a hand gently over his. You didn't fail me, Mr. Bellamy. I failed both of you, he said. But maybe we get to fix things now. She nodded. Maybe we do. Outside, the grounds crew began clearing the overgrown land near the east wing. The soil was dark and rich, ready for a new purpose. Damien watched from the study window, not as a leader, not as a billionaire, but just as a son. A man finally learning how to plant something real. Elara stepped up beside him, her arms crossed. "You think it'll grow?" he asked quietly. She answered without a moment's hesitation. "Only if we nurture it." The first day of work on the community garden began with a morning fog blanketing the Bellamy estate. Mist curled low over the fields behind the east wing, wrapping the land in a hush of possibility. Elara stood at the edge of the marked-off plot, her boots damp from the dew, arms crossed over a soft flannel coat. This was no longer just a garden. It was a promise made tangible. She breathed in the cool, earthy air as trucks began arriving, some bringing compost, others tools and seedlings. Damien had kept his word. Everything she had requested was delivered, from irrigation kits to accessible raised beds for elderly visitors. Still, she felt the familiar tension in her shoulders. Building was always harder than planting. Behind her, Rosalind approached with 2 mugs of coffee. "You're out here like a general surveying the troops before a battle." Elara smiled, accepting one of the mugs. "Feels more like a gardener waiting for the rain." "You'll get your rain and your roots," Rosalind said sagely. "Just don't forget to rest." Elara gave her a look. "Since when have you ever known me to rest?" Rosalind chuckled and walked off towards the house. Moments later, Elara saw Damien stepping onto the grass, his sleeves rolled up, a sight that surprised her. "You're early," she said. "I figured if I'm going to be involved, I should at least know what topsoil looks like," he replied, a hint of self-deprecation in his voice. She tossed him a pair of work gloves. "Then dig in." They worked side by side for a while, clearing stubborn bramble and hauling mulch. As they did, the volunteers began to arrive. Local teenagers fulfilling community service hours, older veterans from the nearby retirement home, 2 women from the local church who brought muffins and stories about their grandchildren. Each one brought something different: energy, wisdom, laughter, even a quiet grief looking for a place to rest. Mid-morning, an older black man named Earl approached Elara with a slow, confident gait and a voice that carried both gravel and warmth. "You the one organizing all this?" "Yes, sir," Elara said, offering her hand. "Elara Vance." He shook it firmly. "Name's Earl. Fought in Nam. Came back and never had a patch of soil to call my own. Figured I'd give yours a try." Elara smiled. "You're more than welcome here, Earl." He glanced at the rows she had outlined. "You know, the soil remembers everything. Blood, sweat, roots, even betrayal." She looked at him, intrigued. "You think it'll forgive us?" He shrugged, his weathered face thoughtful. "Not its job to forgive, just to give us another chance." That stayed with her. By noon, the plot was humming with life. Children dug furrows and dropped seeds into the earth like buried treasure. Elders leaned on their canes and pointed out where the sun would fall best in the afternoon. Elara moved through it all like a quiet current, guiding, adjusting, encouraging. This was what she was meant for. Not just caregiving, but cultivating lives, cultivating second chances. In the distance, Arthur sat in his wheelchair under a large canopy, watching it all unfold. Damien stood beside him. "You see what she's done in a single day?" Arthur said, his voice filled with a quiet awe. "I see it," Damien replied, shielding his eyes from the sun. "She's built more community in 6 hours than this family has managed in 60 years. Damien looked over at Elara. She was laughing with a young boy who had accidentally sprayed her with the hose. Her face, usually so reserved and composed, was lit with an unburdened ease. "She makes it look effortless," he murmured. Arthur glanced at him. You should tell her that. Men like you wait too long to say what matters. And then you wonder why the world doesn't wait back. Damien was quiet. Later, as the volunteers packed up and the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ilara stayed behind to sweep the shed floor and stack the unused tools. Damien entered quietly, holding a folded piece of paper in his hand. "Busy as ever," he said. She glanced up. "You get used to the rhythm. The land tells you what it needs." He held out the paper. "Found this in one of Dad's old ledgers from last year. Thought you should have it." She unfolded it carefully. It was a page from Arthur's garden journal. Ilara sees people. Not roles, not histories, just hearts. I don't think I've ever been seen that way before. Ilara swallowed hard. He had written this months ago, before the stroke, before everything. She handed it back. "He should keep this." "No," Damien said softly. "He wanted you to have it. He just didn't know how to say it." They stood in the quiet of the shed for a beat. Then Ilara said, "You've changed." "Trying to," he admitted. "The truth is, I never really knew who I was outside of control, power, business, and now?" He looked out at the freshly tilled earth. "Now I'm trying to be someone worth trusting." Ilara met his eyes. "It's about showing up. And you've been doing that." A soft breeze drifted through the open shed door, carrying the scent of turned earth and hope. "I want this garden to be permanent," Damien said, his voice low and serious. "Part of the Bellamy legacy." "Then stop calling it that," Ilara said gently. "Make it part of the community's legacy." He smiled, a slow, genuine smile. "You're right." "And," she added, "put a plaque near the gate, for the hands who came before us. That way, no one ever forgets why this matters." Damien looked at her for a long time, a look of profound respect in his eyes. "You're not just rebuilding this land, Ilara. You're rebuilding us." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Some truths didn't need an echo. They just needed space to grow. That night, Ilara sat in her room, a little dirt still under her nails, her body tired in the best possible way. She held the journal page in her hand and reread the words. Ilara sees people. Outside her window, the stars blinked awake. The soil rested, but it remembered. Not just the pain and the judgment, but the effort, the intention, the hands that cared. In the distance, the newly dug rows lay quiet, seeds tucked safely beneath the surface, waiting. Because healing takes time. But now at least it had begun. The final messages and story are contained within the expanded text provided, woven throughout the narrative and culminating in the final scenes. The calls to action are also integrated at key emotional points as requested. The story you've read above is the complete, rewritten version.